For us foresters and restoration workers, rural communities are home. We work in these woods. They're the backbone to our local economies. The long-term resilience of our watersheds and communities is inseparable from the health of our forests. We don't want to eliminate forestry. We're calling for a different approach to forestry. Forestry that's rooted in resilience. One of the main reasons our Pacific Northwest watersheds experience catastrophic floods is because of decades of clear-cut logging, which has decimated our forest's natural ability to absorb rainfall and slow the rate at which water is released back into our watersheds. Across private and public lands, including state forest managed by the Department of Natural Resources, most of what was once ancient forest has been removed. This is a DNR VRH, a variable retention harvest. That is the retention, and this is the harvest. At a watershed scale, VRH functions like clear cutting. When intact forests are clear-cut, their protective sponge-like capabilities are greatly reduced. Rainwater flows unchecked, soils wash away, and rivers swell with all of this sediment, harming salmon, aquatic life, and increasing flood risk.
Developing now on this Como weather-worn day, historic and devastating floods
continues to wreak havoc in the Green River Valley, affecting the communities of Auburn and Kent, Washington.
We are seeing evacuations in the town of Sumas, Nooksack, Everson, Marietta, just over the past couple of days.
Rural counties spend tens of millions on flood repairs. Rural counties pay these costs first, often spending far more on disaster response and repairs than they ever receive from timber revenue. These costs are rarely included when logging revenue is cited, but they are paid by local taxpayers all the same. And still, hillsides continue to be clear-cut, intensifying floods and landslide risk. Once clear-cut, these forests are often replaced with monoculture plantations, like this DNR plantation where an ancient forest once stood. These artificial tree farms lack the biodiversity and soil structure of a natural forest. On these plantations, industrial herbicides like imazapyr, triclopyr, and glyphosate are often sprayed from helicopters or by hand.
Oh, man.
One of the main industry arguments for clear cutting and herbicide spraying is that trees grow back, that trees are a renewable resource. In a way, this is true, but it undermines the fact that when you destroy an intact forested ecosystem and replace it with an artificial plantation, the forest doesn't grow back, and neither does the hydrologic integrity. So, here's the problem. Or rather, here's the solution. Older forests are hydrologically mature, the structural complexity of a healthy older forest, the sponge-like soils and root systems, the densely saturated down logs and woody debris, and the moisture-loving epiphytes and forest floor plant life. They all act like a giant sponge to absorb large volumes of heavy rainfall and release this rainfall back into the watershed at a much more uniform and predictable rate. The hydrologic maturity of older forests also keeps streams cool and clean and flowing, the lifeblood that salmon depend on. Protecting older forests and ending clear-cut logging is one of the best immediate strategies we have to protect our communities from expensive and heartbreaking damage. When a forest is clear-cut, especially an older, structurally complex, biodiverse forest, you completely destroy the forest's ability to mitigate flooding. Some of you may be asking, don't we need wood to build with? As a culture, we need wood, especially to build the homes we live in. We need to build high-quality homes that will last multiple generations, instead of fast, poorly built structures common today that are built primarily for profit, not for longevity, destined for the landfill. To produce wood, we don't need a clear-cut forest, and we don't need to spray toxic herbicides. We can create a new paradigm of forestry, teams of skilled labor, longer rotations, selective harvest, protecting mature structurally complex forests, safeguarding biodiversity, and restoring degraded tree plantations so our forests stay intact and more resilient to pest, disease, wind throw, and wildfire. We need to grow, process, and utilize our wood locally. We can create more jobs in the woods through labor-intensive ecological forestry, restoration work, and watershed repair, while keeping forests functioning, watersheds intact, and rural communities strong for generations to come.
We have an amazing group of panelists here, experts in responsible forestry. They'll each share their work followed by a brief Q&A. With our tight schedule, as they speak, please make a mental note of any questions that you may want to ask them later. So over here we have Daniel Harns, one of the founding board members of the Center for Responsible Forestry. And by the way, he came all the way from Bellingham to be here tonight. Katie Fields, the interim forest program director for Washington Conservation Action. Miguel Perez-Gibson, who's on the Washington Conservation Action Forest Policy Advisor Team. And Sherri Dysart is with Mason County Climate Justice.
Thank you so much for being here. And thanks for having us here. This is cool to see a full house. Beautiful space, appreciate it. I do have a speech prepared, but there's some other parts that I want to include. So the way that our forest lands are managed in this state is set up by an entity called the Forest Practices Board. So they determine the rules on how private lands are managed and also our state lands as well. So from an overarching view, right, what I was showing were how private lands are the current common industrial practices, which are clear cutting on private lands. So that's allowed by state policy set up by the Forest Practices Board through the Forest Practice Act. And anytime a timber sale goes up, they have to submit paperwork and have it be signed off on. And it's the same for the state as well with the Department of Natural Resources. They follow a little bit different set of rules, and they have clever names like variable retention harvests, which we explained in the film. But again, so the Forest Practices Board is really a focal point where there needs to be a lot of reform. So I just wanted to give that context. I couldn't fit everything into that 8-minute film, so here are additional points I feel are relevant to present now. When we talk about the timber industry, we need to differentiate that not all of it is bad. Part of my work is revitalizing local industry, grounded in stewardship and long-term thinking. We need timber to build with, but not at the expense of intact, functional ecosystems. And we can't be using wood for short life cycle, disposable materials. For me, products created from timber ending up in landfills is ecological heresy. Well-built homes are supposed to last hundreds of years, and there are plenty of examples of wooden structures that are 400, 800, 1,300 years old that are still standing in great condition. What has decimated our forest is the financialization and privatization of forest lands, which includes the mechanization of the industry, skilled crews being replaced by expensive machines. What I mean by big timber are large corporations like Weyerhaeuser that manage forest lands for maximum profit through structures called REITs and TIMOs. A REIT is a real estate investment trust, and a TIMO is a timber investment management organization where forests are treated as financial assets. And the pressure is on short-term quarterly returns. There are also large private timberland owners like Sierra Pacific Industries here who operate more traditionally outside of REITs and TIMOs, yet they manage their lands through harmful clear-cutting industrial practices, as does the DNR and federal agencies. So the DNR is an opportunity because it's our public land, so we're allowed to have a voice, and that's why there's a big focus on it right now. And Miguel will get more into the history of older forest on our state lands. So standard practice today is a clear cut every 30 to 40 years. But trees, specifically Douglas fir, the primary cash crop tree, are capable of living 800 to 1,200 years or more. That's their normal lifespan. If there's any point that I can hammer home, is that old-growth trees are not special. They're totally normal. An old-growth tree is what a tree is supposed to be. Why they seem abnormal and special is because we've logged over 90% of them. And there's barely any left, and most of all the forests that we have now are not forests, they're farms. They're short-rotation plantations. We are harvesting trees at a fraction of their lifespan, literally when they're infants in tree years. When old trees live their full life of 800 to 1,200 years or more, after they die, they have a second life, decaying slowly over centuries, building the very soil that gives life to these forests. Big Timber's harvest and replant clear-cut plantations are using and depleting soils that took 10,000 years to build. There's an old logging culture saying that older trees are decadent or wasteful because some have heart rot, which isn't ideal for lumber. But those trees are still alive, functional, storing enormous volumes of carbon, providing incredible habitat for hundreds of species, producing and stabilizing bioregional climates, and they're more fire resistant from their thick, furrowed bark. But in an industrial commodity, when these trees get old and die, it's seen as a waste. A 300 to 400-year-old tree is just getting into its stride. I've been climbing for 30 years, mountaineering for 20 years, and climbing old growth for 10 years. And so anytime I climb a 300 to 500-year-old tree, I think that it's the same age as me in tree years. And it's really trippy. And from a mountaineering perspective, like 40 to 50 is often when mountaineers hit their prime because it's a combination of endurance and strength, and most importantly, experience. And so these trees are in the middle of their life when they're 400, 500, 600 years old. So this concept of longer rotations, allowing trees to grow older before harvesting them, is better for everyone. Young trees have branches further down on the stem, often sometimes all the way down to the ground, as you saw. Branches mean knots, and knots mean lower grade lumber. As a tree grows in height and girth, it sheds those branches and produces tight grain, knot-free wood, the highest value material. Essentially, with modern forestry practices, everyone loses except for corporate short-term profit and quarterly returns. We get lower quality wood, less carbon storage, degraded ecosystems, and decimated watersheds. I don't think there's anything ethically wrong with harvesting old growth if we did it sustainably and ecological, but we missed our chance a long time ago. And the only way old growth harvesting can ever be ethical again is if we regrow what we've destroyed, which is possible if we're willing to plan 500 years into the future and meet clear landscape thresholds. With selective harvest, you have to maintain intact canopy, habitat continuity, and ecological integrity above all. Imagine regrowing the old growth of the past. It is possible. The climate is changing. It won't be the exact structure, but we still have the genetic legacy. This entire landscape, where we're at right now, Tacoma, was a lowland old growth forest, primarily dominated by Douglas fir, hemlock, and cedar. All of this, we're standing in the spirit of an ancient forest that was here 200-300 years ago, this whole land. And that's why it's critical that the DNR stops logging legacy forests, to make my conclusion. So legacy forests are old growth forests that were logged before industrial practices the industrial practices that took off in the 1940s. Meaning, so legacy forests, when they were logged, they weren't replaced with monoculture tree plantations, and they still contain the genetic and biological legacy of these ancient lands. And they were often high graded, which means they just took the best trees and they left the rest. So often in these legacy forests, you have the new growth that naturally regenerated that still contains all the biological legacy, but you also have old growth remnants. So I live next door to that old growth, that forest that you saw in the film, and there are numerous old growth legacies. I've counted over 50 in this 90-acre section. So the reason why these legacy forests are so important is if we allow them to grow, they're our best chance of regrowing old growth, of creating the old growth of our future. And protecting the last remains of legacy forest, which is a small sliver of what the DNR manages. It's less than 4% of all of its forest land. It's really the bare absolute minimum that we can do. Yet they're still logging them, even underneath David Upthegrove's commissionership. And it's very complicated, and there's a lot of work going into it, but they are still logging them. So the bare minimum we can do is conserve them. My personal mantra is old growth is the future, and I just really appreciate everyone for their time.
A lot shorter than Daniel. Thank you, everyone, for being here tonight, and thank you so much to Tacoma Indivisible for putting together this panel. I really want to also just commend you all on all of the work that you have contributed toward environmental policy broadly, and also a lot of the elections work that you've been engaged in, as well as the amazing showing with No Kings. So I'm just doing a bit of a brief interlude between the experts to kind of introduce what Washington Conservation Action does as an organization before handing it over to Miguel Perez-Gibson, who is much more deeply knowledgeable about these topics than I am. So Washington Conservation Action is an organization that has existed in some form since 1967. You may know us more under our previous names of Washington Environmental Council and the Washington Conservation Voters. We are an affiliate of the National League of Conservation Voters, and we have 3 policy programs. Forestry is obviously the one that we're focusing on tonight. We also have a climate team and a Puget Sound team. And then we also have a tribal nations program, government affairs, and a political team, so we also engage in some of these election work as well. We endorse candidates like Dave Upthegrove as part of our political work. And we also do an award of a Legislator of the Year every year for their contributions to environmental policy in the state of Washington. We have, in more recent years, been deeply involved with the Climate Commitment Act, including the defense of the Climate Commitment Act that happened last year with the No on 2117 campaign. In terms of what we're doing on the forest team, we have quite a few different kind of areas of work within forestry. State lands is a major area that has been part of the organization for quite some time. We also do work related to the adaptive management program and regulatory forestry. We have work on climate smart wood markets. We also do work on wildfire and beneficial fire, and then we also engage in a couple of different projects on an annual basis as the whole forest team, including our annual report card on the Department of Natural Resources, which we call the State of Our Forests and Public Lands. And that is a report that covers about 18 different topic areas that are specific elements of the work that DNR does, that we're basically grading them on the work that they're doing in those areas. We also have an annual conference called the Climate Friendly Forestry Conference, and that happens in December of every year, where we bring together around 150 individuals to have conversations and be part of panels and sessions related to various aspects of what's going on with managing forests more responsibly than what we see with the business as usual timber case. And so that's something that's attended by academics, by timber industry representatives, by agencies across the state, as well as other nonprofits and other types of entities that join us for that conference. And then the last thing that I wanted to share about is also just the work that we're doing on ongoing work related to the Climate Commitment Act with the development of revisions to the U.S. Forest Protocol for offsets. The final thing I wanted to mention before handing things off to Miguel is that we do have our annual gala coming up next Friday, May 1st. That'll be in Seattle, and it'd be wonderful if anyone in this room would like to join us for that event. So I'd be happy to share more information about that if you'd be interested. And thank you so much for the time today. I'll hand it over to Miguel.
Hi, everyone. Is everybody here from Tacoma? Anybody not from Tacoma? No? Everybody else? When you mentioned Wright Park, my heart skipped a beat because I met my wife at Wright Park 40 years ago. Wow, there is really a lot to cover, and we're not going to be able to cover it all. But I'm happy to come back. I'm seeing probably all of us would be happy to come back if you want to do a deeper dive. But I think it's really important for you to get be able to wrap your arms around this whole issue. Like, why are we even talking about this? And why are these trees being logged? And what? So I have 5 points. I'm going to have to only spend like 2 minutes on each one. I'm going to try to cover the history of where we got here, about these older forests and why they are on the chopping block, so to speak. Just a brief overview of the timber industry so you kind of understand where they're coming from, and a little bit of the legal piece, and then kind of where we are today. Should mention TVW, if you guys familiar with TVW? This is a show called The Impact, and I'm on it right now. I think it's 7 o'clock, it's being aired. And so if you want to hear what the timber industry has to say, they're given 10 minutes, and I'm getting 10 minutes. So I think you can just go online, and it's only probably a 30-minute show. I would be remiss if I didn't mention this young man over here in the front row, Joshua Wright. He's with the Legacy Forest Defense Council. He's spent more time in these forests than not, going up and down hills and measuring trees and doing a lot. So I encourage you to connect with him if you really want to get a sense of the beauty of these trees and his heartfelt commitment to working on this effort. So he's put in a lot of work, and I just want to acknowledge his effort. Okay, so this is almost like War and Peace. Maybe you'd call it Schools and Trees, but it's a long story. And I've been involved in this about 50 years, believe it or not. I started out on the Olympic Peninsula in the old growth, way back in the day. But so here's where we are. One of the first things this country did, even before the Constitution, was it was called the Northwest Ordinance of 1787, which basically looked at the Republic and said, just as Plato decided, you cannot have a democracy without an educated citizenry, right? We all see that? I mean, that's part of our problem today, right? Is we don't have an educated citizenry. Exactly. And so what they had decided in this ordinance is any of these new territories coming in would have to have institutions that supported schools. So what they did was, I think that was called the Northwest Ordinance because it was north of the Ohio River and west of the Ohio River. So when the territory became a state, the federal government withheld land that they only allowed the new state to use for schools. So basically, if you understand how mapping is done, a township is 6 miles by 6 miles, and then there's 36 sections, which is 640 acres. And so they said in every township, section 16 would be for the purpose of supporting a school. And it was basically to support a school teacher. And it wasn't really enough money to do that. And so as they went along and other states were added, they said, okay, we'll give you 2 sections, sections 16 and 36. And that was 1787. So about 100 years later, 1889, Washington became a state. And every section 16 and 36 was devoted to the support of schools. They also by that time realized, hey, we better give them some sections for other institutions. So University of Washington, Washington State, WSU, U of W, other colleges, some money for build the Capitol, prisons. So they were, and this is called the Federal Trust, and it's about 2 million acres. So that's the land we're talking about. Well, no, it's less than 2 million acres now. There's also a chunk of lands that are not associated with this that are called county lands, and I'll get to those. I think I'm almost out of my 2 minutes for this first part. So let me speed it up. So what they did was, a lot of this was just, we're gonna sell these lands off. And we'll take the money, and instead of giving it to the school teacher, we're gonna put it in a fund called the Permanent Fund, and off the interest of that, we'll support the schools. And that went along pretty merrily. But I want to point out, there's a long arc of conservation in this state. We're doing our part, but there were other people that worked on this. And at one point, the Commissioner of Public Lands in the 30s, his name was Savage, and he said, God, it'd be a shame to sell those forests out on the Olympic Peninsula. I know we're selling it, but God, we should really keep that and make it get this, he called it a sustained yield forest. This is in the 30s. And state did do that. It was challenged by the Supreme Court. I imagine all these organizations or interests like timber and stuff wanted to buy those lands, but the Supreme Court said there's nothing in the Constitution that requires you to sell them, so you can keep them. So really from that point forward, it shifted to managing the lands for what they had on them. In the eastern Washington, it would be agriculture, and in the west, it was forests. And there was a lot of these legacy forests or older forests we're talking about came up during that period. Up until 1946, there wasn't any kind of reforestation required. And by the way, when that act was passed, the landowners sued, took it all the way to the United States Supreme Court, said we do not believe that we should have to plant trees on our land. But they lost. So I'm trying to say that you have Savage, you've got the Reforestation Act, and we're sort of involved in that, only we're improving as we go in terms of our efforts around conservation. So, speed it up. In the 60s, when Boeing was doing really great, before they said the last person, leaving Seattle, turn the lights off, they didn't have enough schools. I mean, the population for high school students went from like 150,000 to 300,000 within a year. The school districts did not want to be taxed. The school districts didn't want to do levies, so they asked for a Constitution amendment. So they in the 60s created a Constitution amendment that said, instead of a permanent fund, we want a construction fund, which means instead of the money going into a permanent fund where it's invested and you live off the interest, no, we want the money today so we can build schools. So we'll make it brick and mortar. So they did. And a lot of the liquidation of the old growth in the 60s was to support that effort. And probably 50% of the schools were funded through that mechanism back in the 60s. It dropped down to about 25% during the 80s, and today it's about 1%. But still, we're still logging them at the same rate and but it's the amount that it contributes is minuscule to what the need is. So that's one point I want to make, is the value to the schools is relatively small when you compare it to the value of this forest. The county lands, just real briefly, they were cut over in the 20s and 30s. The state created a trust, and so those are managed to provide revenue to the counties. Fire trucks, et cetera, this all comes from this same process of having a trust. The other, one of the things I want to mention here is this is a perpetual trust, or a perpetual, I would really actually call it perpetual holding of land. It's in perpetuity. That's a long, long time. And as DNR, Commissioner Upthegro, is the trust manager, so he has to pay attention not just to what the beneficiaries of the revenue are asking for, but also in the future generations. So there's an intergenerational equity. You have to think about today, but also in the future. So it's really important to hold on to what we have and manage it carefully, knowing that climate change is around us. We don't know how the trees are going to grow 100 years from now or 50 years from now. We're already getting seedlings from California and bringing them up here. So, whoa, let's not just liquidate the last 100,000 acres of naturally regenerative forest. Can we slow it down a little bit? Because this is a forever, perpetual trust. You cannot be dictated by the needs of a particular beneficiary or trust or today. I tell this in the TVW story, but I was in Dublin, went to Guinness, and I saw the lease that Sir Alec Guinness, he wanted a lease forever so he could build the brewery. And the king, the monarch, he said, no, we're not going to give you a lease forever. Are you crazy? We'll give it to you for 5,000 years. So when I say forever, that's a long time. And if we don't have that lens, I think that's what we, as the citizens here, we have to say, slow down. Don't talk to me about the fire truck you need today. Okay, so these older forests, what happened? As a result of the liquidation of the old growth, these species were going to be evaporated from the earth. Northern spotted owls, marbled murrelets. So Commissioner of Public Lands at that time developed a habitat conservation plan with the federal government, which means if we do certain things, then we will be exempt from the requirements from the ESA because we're going to create a habitat conservation for, in this case, Washington was the first state to do this, all species. All species. And part of that was these older forests. They had a role to play. When she left and a new administration came in, they said, sure be nice to log these forests. How do we do it? Well, yeah, because the plan says we have to keep 10 to 15% of the land always in these forests. How do we get around that? Well, what if we say we'll grow them and make them, more structurally diverse and not use age? So the Board of Natural Resources, when Daniel was talking, there's two boards, Forest Practices, sees the private lands, the Board of Natural Resources, which has the beneficiaries, which would be representatives, the governor, superintendent of public instruction, dean from the College of Washington, WSU, U of W, and then a county rep. However, what happened was this 175,000, 200,000 acres that they suddenly say, hey, we can log it because we're going to create older forests through silviculture and thinning, which they never did. But what happened was that they also needed to provide habitat for the marbled murrelet. And they didn't know how to do it, so they decided to, they had to hold this 200,000 acres, so they created a plan for the murrelet. Well, that was in 2005, so that didn't happen until 2019. So basically, this base of older forest was sitting there in abeyance for almost 20 20 years or 15 years. And during the Trump administration, the DNR went to get their amendment to protect the marble murrelet. They did a scientific report back in 2008 which said, well, to do it right for these murrelets, you need 175,000 acres. But they went to the, under the Trump administration, they got a deal for 35,000. So guess what happened? 100 and you name it, 1,000 acres became suddenly available. And there was a rapid march to put these forests up for timber sales, and that's what's happening right now. Yeah, so you know, one of the points that you'll hear is, well, we have to do this to create revenue for the beneficiaries. Well, then what happens when they're cut? Then what do? There's no more trees to, well, there are other trees. There's 2 million acres. This is 75,000, 100,000. That's what, less than 10%? Why do we have to cut these if there's other trees that we could? Just for some context here, I said this is my other point, was the timber industry itself in Washington State. I want to give you the context here. We are a big timber state. I mean, there's 40 million acres that makes up Washington State. About 20 million or 23 million is forest land. A lot of it's parks, Forest Service, federal land, tribal land, and the private land is anywhere from 8 to 10 million acres. And they harvest around 3 billion board feet every year. So it's about 76% of the timber harvest comes from private forest land. And of that 3 billion, there's about 350 million of that or so that's exported. Well, does anyone have a picture of what I'm talking about, 3 billion board feet? Does that make any sense? Let me do it this way then. How about a log truck? Anyone seen a log truck? Okay. A log truck, there's a tonnage limit, maybe 20, 25 tons, but what that comes out to is about 5,000 board feet, each log truck. So 100 million board feet would be 20,000 log trucks every year. 3 billion would be, you do the math. But DNR has been cutting 400 to 500, so that's about 80,000 to 100,000 log trucks a year. So we're not, this is not about getting rid of logging in this state or about reducing the amount of timber that's being harvested. It's about being very selective of the little bit of natural heritage we have left and being careful about it and being stewards of it and recognizing, whoa, let's be careful here. And let's look at this genetic resource. We've got climate change, and maybe we got to be more careful. Finally, what's the legal ramifications of this? We brought a case to the Supreme Court, Washington Supreme Court. The industry will say we lost. We say, well, we may have lost the main case, but the court commented on a lot of the things that we wanted to hear. One was that DNR is not required to maximize revenue. They're not required to maximize revenue. Also, the Constitution, unlike Montana's Constitution or some of the other states, our Constitution says these state lands are held in trust for all the people. So we're beneficiaries also of what? Clean water, snowpack, wildlife, other aspects. Sure, they provide money for the institutions we want, but they also provide a broader set of values. The court said you have to comply with the Constitution, you have to comply with your where the money is distributed, beneficiaries, and finally, all the other state laws. So what we really need is a redo. This is a 1957 model that we have right now. Back when I was talking about in the 30s and 40s, there was a lot of graft, there was some illegal stuff done, there were deals made to selling land to private constituents, et cetera, and that's when the DNR was created in 1957. and created this sort of mandate that we have to do everything for the benefit of these beneficiaries as opposed to special deals for others. So that culture is what exists in the DNR today. It's from about 1957 on. Very clearly, the employees believe our job is to maximize revenue, even though the court says they don't. That's how they approach their job. That's why you see the pictures of those clear cuts that you see. They don't feel like they're doing the wrong thing. They feel like this is what they're supposed to do. The other thing is, I think it's important for you to realize, is they are not funded by tax dollars. The employees are funded through the timber sales themselves. So it's a different sort of relationship here when you have state employees who are actually funded through the proceeds of the timber sales. They're sort of like connected. So that's a problem. I think that needs to be fixed. Currently, right now, just to get into a little bit of the weeds or the underbrush, they have a 5-year action development plan, and right now the commissioner has agreed to let them follow through on this, which would amount to about 15,000 acres being harvested. And that we think is a problem, and that's what Dave was sort of mentioning, that people are going to disagree. Well, that's an issue. Did you say I have 30 minutes left? Oh, 30 seconds. My glasses just don't work that great. Okay. All right. So thank you for being here. Here's the bottom line for climate change. There's a book called The Tree Line by Ben Rollins, if you haven't had a chance to read it. He went around the Arctic Circle, if you will, the isotherm of where the tree line is. We're warming up at such a rate that the tree line's moving north, not at inches a year, but hundreds of feet every year. A 50-year-old forest can store 50 metric tons of carbon. A 150-year-old forest can sequester 300 metric tons. So there's a lot we can do, and this is the reason, but I wanted you also just to get this tension around what you're hearing from the timber industry and the counties and schools and why they feel the way they do and historically why that's been, but also why we need to do a revamp of the whole way we manage these forests. Okay. Thank you.
I'm Sherri, and I live in Mason County. I'm a board member of Mason County Climate Justice, and I am kind of zeroing in on one tiny bit of this puzzle of how we manage forests. And so I really appreciate, first of all, Barb's land acknowledgement. It really, really hits home with me. So land is sacred, all life is sacred, and forest defense is climate defense. How do we do our part in protecting our precious ecosystems? And what does climate justice look like in regard to DNR actions? DNR intends to spray a chemical cocktail of herbicides on more than 2,000 acres of public forest lands in southwest Washington in the coming year. The units are located in Grays Harbor, Lewis, Wahkiakum, Cowlitz, Pacific, and Skamania counties. DNR plans to spray glyphosate and other herbicides via helicopter as site preparation in advance of replanting. DNR sometimes justifies herbicide use as necessary to control invasive species. However, the sites currently proposed for treatment do not contain significant amounts of Scotch broom or other highly invasive plants. Instead, the stated goal is to eliminate competing vegetation. specifically hardwood trees such as alder and my friend's big leaf maple. Along with understory species like sword fern and vine maple, in order to favor the growth of conifer plantations. And what other species will be impacted by this herbicide treatment? These include salmonberry, elderberry, cascara, and herbs. These are all food for wildlife. One of the targets is big leaf maple, which is known to support biodiversity, stabilize the soil, improve water quality, and provide food for spring pollinators. Similarly, red alder is able to thrive where conifers may not, to the benefit of many bird species, insects, and pollinators. To enhance nitrogen fixing and improvement of soil's mineral content, especially after major disturbances such as wildfire. Biodiversity is the foundation of a healthy forest, acting like an insurance policy that protects the ecosystem from collapse. Many of these areas were last logged over a century ago and have never been treated with herbicides. Therefore, even after recent clear cutting, they still support relatively diverse and resilient plant communities. Some understory species, such as sword fern, can persist for decades or even centuries, contributing to long-term ecological stability. Applying herbicides in these areas will fundamentally alter that trajectory, simplifying these ecosystems, reducing biodiversity in order to prioritize timber production. Glyphosate is classified as probably carcinogenic to humans by the World Health Organization's International Agency for Research on Cancer. Sorry. Final comments, like talking about discussion of ecosystems, so this is really hard for me to talk about, so. Okay, beyond human health concerns, glyphosate threatens water quality through runoff and poses serious risks to a wide range of aquatic species, including the globally imperiled Columbia torrent salamander, which has been documented directly adjacent to the areas that they plan to spray. The buffers mentioned in DNR's documents, which can be as narrow as 50 feet, offer little reassurance when herbicides are sprayed from helicopters, raising the risk of chemical drift into waterways and neighboring communities. Everything about these chemical applications undermines the resilience of native forest ecosystems. Aerial spraying puts priority on short-term revenue over long-term ecological health of our precious ecosystems. Is the DNR managing public forests with perpetuity as a guiding principle? What are your thoughts? In my opinion, it's time to end this toxic cycle for good. And thank you. And just finally, I read this prophecy that was attributed to Hopi peoples, but I think that is a common theme throughout indigenous peoples, so it's very short. When the earth is ravaged and the animals are dying, a new tribe of people shall come onto the earth, from many colors, creeds, and classes, and who, by their actions and deeds, shall make the earth green again. they shall be known as the warriors of the rainbow.
Thank you, panelists. There's so much to take in. And anyway, at this point, we're going to have a Q&A. We ask you to make a clear question, not a statement. You'll have about 30 seconds to ask your question, and speakers will have a couple minutes to respond. That way, more people will have an opportunity to get more clarity and ask their questions. So you can just line up by the microphone.
This is more about urban forests. Do you guys deal with them at all? I mean, okay, because I'm going to run this into the ground, man. There are Gary oaks that are like 500 years old, and they keep getting cut down in Lakewood. And I want to know if there's, and they have rules not to do it, but they don't follow the rules. I've been going to their meetings and asking them to stop. We've been writing letters. Is there some force somewhere that will stop them from cutting trees down for parking lots for trucks?
Well, believe it or not, I started the urban forestry program in the state, getting some legislation passed way back in the day. DNR has an urban forestry program, but the regulations covering the cutting down trees are going to be governed by the municipality that those trees are in, if it's the city or the county. So are you talking to the city or the county? And they're telling you there's no regulation?
They never answer. They just listen to what you say, and then they don't respond. And then the trees get cut down because the land got sold.
Yeah.
I tried to talk to the assessor about a deal for people to not cut down stuff, and then they wouldn't have to pay property taxes, but I have to go talk to the county about that. I mean, it's like,
You've got a county commissioner that used to work for Cascade Conservancy. What's his name? Mello, yeah, talk to Ryan. I go right to his office.
Do you have a reference for that Warriors of the Rainbow?
Oh, thank you. I was just doing my search of things to research for this. By the way, I plagiarized a lot of what my friend Joshua composed about these herbicide treatments, and so giving credit where credit is due. And I just happened to go online and find that, and when I researched it, they said it was a Hopi prophecy. But then I looked, and further it said others like Lakota, other indigenous tribes have a similar prophecy around that. So somehow beautiful lines have had this same kind of prophecy about the warriors of the rainbow. And
I've been collecting stories like this and other prophecies from all sorts of different, and they're all saying the same thing. Is that we are on the verge of a great transformation.
Yes, that's true. That's true. I believe that.
I've lived a lot of different lives, and I managed an archival video library from the 60s and 70s, and we digitized thousands and thousands of videos. And in that collection, we have a video of the Hopi prophecy from Thomas Benyakia and David Manonia, who were Hopi tribal leaders, and it's on YouTube. So if you want to watch an hour-long video from the early 60s of a Hopi elder speaking his prophecy, it's you can search for the Hopi prophecy on Soundings Mindful Media. Soundings Mindful Media, and it's Thomas Benyakia and David Manonia. It's really cool. But yeah, the Hopi prophecy on Soundings Mindful Media. It's really cool.
I am motivated and alarmed by your discussion about the herbicide spraying, and I would like to know one or two things that I might do about it to oppose it, and what the timing is on this. Is it like yesterday, or?
Joshua has more information about that, but I'll just call attention to your yellow action sheet. And there is how to get a hold of DNR on this action sheet. And Joshua has created on the Legacy Forest Defense Coalition's website, there's a blog under resources that talks about this, and all of the FPAs that are involved, there are 7, and they were recently approved, but they have not said when they're actually going to do the spraying yet, right?
They haven't been approved yet. They've been submitted for public comment.
Okay.
So you can submit public comment. As Sherri said, there's on the Legacy Forest Defense Coalition website, which I assume is on there. Maybe it's not. These cards have the website on them. You can go to the blog, and there's a blog that talks about how you can take action. And this is fairly routine. So this is just this year's batch, basically, of aerial spraying applications that they want to do that is currently open for public comments, I think, for the next week or so.
Yeah, I think that'll 26, maybe? Is that right? Yeah. It's always this really short public comment period that just drives me insane. Another part of the process that's not quite right. And so, so yes, please, as many people as can go on and do public comment about this and oppose these spraying operations. This should have been outlawed, in my opinion, a long, long time ago, especially on public lands. I mean, it's not illegal, but maybe possibly immoral. I mean, life is sacred. If we're going to have an ongoing, viable planet for my 2 children and those that come after them, we have to do some really different things. And this is one of them.
I was horrified when you were talking about the mindset of the people in the DNR. When they have this mindset, I call it a mental illness, where everything has to be turned to profit. And so the question is, I think Dave Updegrove is the one to lead that change, but what can be done to get that mentality and that mantra changed so that DNR and the staff at DNR, most importantly, understand that it's not just money.
Well, I think that the mantra that we ought to be talking about is public lands should be managed not like industrial lands. This whole herbicide thing is an industrial model. We want ecologically based forestry on our public lands. And that's what we want our foresters to be doing.
DNR, BNR, the Board of Natural Resources, meets every month. And you can attend in person if you want to go to Olympia, or online. There's Zoom meetings. The more people like you that come and make public comment and say, I want things done differently, and this is why, because you manage this land for the public good, not just to keep your agency going. And there needs to be a legislative answer to how we fund that agency instead of cutting down trees. Because right now, there's a perverse incentive, right? More trees, more money for the agency. That's crazy. That is crazy thinking.
I think what's happening right now is a really good direction. The general public doesn't really understand how forests are managed or our public forests. So everyone being right here and just learning about this material and having events like this happening more and more is super important. So I think this is a really good, the more people understand what's happening both on private forests, aerial spraying, that's every day. That's industry practice. That just happens all the time. How many people know that, right? And so it's just no one. And I could go on, but getting involved with how the Board of Natural Resources, they meet on the first Tuesday of every month. You can just Google DNR, BNR, and the first thing that will pop up is the page for the Board of Natural Resources and all of the events that are happening. Being educated about what's happening is the most powerful thing we can do. There was a point where I knew none of this at all. So we all start from scratch.
Are there any ballot issues coming up that we should anticipate?
So a large body of our work is through working with the legislation, absolutely. And so if you just follow our organizations, we will consistently be putting out action items. We're in the process of strategizing for the next legislative session, that is how we're gonna make big change, is changing policy, changing the financial structures at a legal and law level with our state,
So there is so much to learn, and that's why all of us are here. This is going to be recorded, and it'll be on YouTube on the Indivisible Tacoma YouTube section. So I know I'm going to have to listen to it again and again. But I do want to say that I know some of you guys out there are environmental activists. I know you, I've seen you. And one of the things that we do that we think is really critical is we take action. We turn that energy of hope and of lack of hope, of fear and despair, and we turn it into action. So what Indivisible Tacoma is doing are a couple things. One, we're writing a letter we have an organizational sign-on letter to Governor Ferguson, because a lot of the decisions are made through him, and they're structural. So I'm going to read you a little bit of that letter to him. We can't take any more questions, but thank you. Stay and listen. Here's just a little bit of that letter. On April 18th, Governor Ferguson, you spoke briefly at an event supporting the roadless rule that Trump's attempting to rescind. You said, "This is something I feel very strongly about and personally. Speaking about the times that you have spent hiking and climbing in Washington, we are extremely glad to know that your personal feelings about forests because 100 plus year legacy forests under state control are now being decimated as you read this letter. Indivisible Tacoma and the undersigned organizations are writing to ask you to immediately take actions to save the few rare structurally complex legacy forests, less than 3%, that are left in Washington state. The legislature has entrusted the Board of Natural Resources with overseeing the management of our state forest lands, and your designee serves as a member of that board. While other members have voted against these harvesting sales, your designee has consistently supported them. Further, some DNR and BNR problems are embedded in the state's economy, and the solutions which go beyond the structural purview of this Commissioner of Public Lands can only come from your office." There are like eight asks for Governor Ferguson, or reasons why we want him to take action. I'm going to name one of them because I had a lot to put into this statement. The financial costs to mitigate the climate consequences of logging and aerial spraying of carcinogenic herbicides on legacy forests will be exponentially higher than any short-term benefits. If deforestation continues, our state and our counties will bear the expenses resulting from increased floods, landslides, wildfires, water contamination, and more extreme human and ecological disasters. How many of you are part of different organizations here? So if you're part of a different organization and would like to sign on to this letter, I only read a few parts of it. Then meet over here, and we'll take your contact information. Other people here, at the doors, we have people with action items that they can take as individuals as well. And my heart goes out to all of you. I'm learning so much, and we'll definitely have you back again. Just you guys and more time, we have so much to learn. So thank you so much.